one of the joys of actually working at a Catholic think tank on migration is that we can link people like you all on these really important issues. We can get the best people together to talk about the most important issues. And I really feel like today we have the best people from a really diverse group of sectors and ministries running really innovative programs to talk about what I think is one of the most important issues facing us right now, which is the integration of 40 million foreign-born people. And if you count their children, it's probably nearly twice that much. And if you count the third generation, it's even a larger group, easily more than a quarter of the country. And it's a huge challenge. Let me make a few thank yous at the outset before I make a few opening comments, and then we'll turn to our panel. First of all, thank yous and introductions, I guess, to first of all to Sister Sally Duffy from the SC Ministry Foundation. I don't see her, but I know that she's here. Maybe she can raise her hand. Oh, sorry, Sally. She's supporting the gathering, but she's also guiding the gathering and kind of somebody that we've spoken to a lot about kind of the direction of this process, and really is not just a terrific philanthropist, but also is a really important person in the Catholic social justice world. So I wanted to thank her up front. And also a particular thanks to Bishop DiMarzio for coming down from Brooklyn last night, and I think he's doing an interview right now. And I'll introduce him more at length prior to his keynote, which will be at 10 o'clock this morning. Jean Atkinson from the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, which is our close partner in this project. Thank God, after 25 years, Clinic finally got a competent, first-rate executive director, so the sky's the limit at this point for a clinic. Watch it grow. And I don't know if he's in the room, but Father Ezio Marchetto from this parish, which is Holy Rosary Parish, for hosting us today. Casa Italia, which is this room and downstairs as well, is located in this parish, which is the national Italian parish for the Washington, D.C. area, and it just had its 100th year anniversary, so it's a really fitting place for a gathering on immigrant integration. And talk about, have Catholics done well? I was at the 100th anniversary, and Justice Scalia was there, Justice Alito was there, the Chief of Staff of the military was there, Adorno, and about 700 other people. So apparently it is possible for Catholic groups to integrate into this country. And for those of you who don't know them, let me just mention the Scalabrinians who support the Center for Migration Studies of New York. It's a congregation. It's a congregation of priests, religious, and sisters, and also lay people. And their whole mission is to serve migrants around the world. And so they run welcoming centers, schools, migrant shelters, and other kinds of ministries in more than 270 places along migration corridors around the world, and in receiving communities around the world as well, including the Center for Migration Studies. And Father Leonir Chiarella, who's my very close colleague in New York, who will be here later today, is actually the director of that network of shelters and welcoming centers. They were originally founded in the 19th century to accompany Italian migrants to the United States, and have since branched out very, very significantly. So it's not a very well-known congregation, but they do fabulously important work around the world. And for my own sake, the Center for Migration Studies of New York, it's its 50th year anniversary right now, which is hard to believe. And so this is the first event of a series of events we're doing to honor the 50th anniversary of the Center for Migration Studies. And I can't think of a better or a more impressive event to kick this off with. And finally, let me just thank the two people that pretty much run everything at the Center for Migration Studies. For people that have worked with me before, they know that I often come up with big, impossible ideas and projects, and then they have to be brought to fruition. So I want to thank Rachel Reyes and Brianna George, who actually are bringing all of these ideas and these great projects to fruition. And they're for those of you who are new to the Catholic Integration Initiative and the process, it's based on an idea which I think is so simple and obvious that it's that it's got to be a good idea, right? And that is the more than 40 million foreign-born people, their children, they're the third generation. That includes, you know, some very wealthy immigrants, and it includes a growing middle class, which is an underreported story. However, most immigrants overall, they earn less than Native Americans. They work in more dangerous jobs. They have lower education levels, lower insurance levels, lower college enrollment rates, higher dropout rates, lower home ownership rates, and of course, as you'd expect, less English proficiency. And more than 25%, I think it's more like 28%, lack legal status, as we know. And of course, the unauthorized and their families have borne the brunt of very aggressive, well-resourced immigration enforcement policies and kind of a dysfunctional immigration system that Congress still isn't fixing even now after many years. So that's one part of the story. There's that need. The immigrants, their children, their grandchildren are precisely the kind of people that need Catholic institutions. And if Catholic institutions could collectively pivot to today's immigrants and the way that they pivoted and were established in response to the gifts and contributions and needs of past immigrants, then that would have profound effects for millions of people. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But the other side of the equation is this, that immigrants aren't just needy people, they're rich people in a lot of ways. They're hardworking, they're family-oriented, they're optimistic about the direction of our country, they bring spiritual and cultural gifts, and they're filling Catholic pews. They're filling Catholic pews in very significant ways. They're exactly the kinds of people that could revive and revitalize Catholic institutions. And in fact, the vitality of the Catholic Church and of U.S. society overall is going to increasingly depend on their contributions and their participation in their leadership in these institutions. The project asks a simple question. It's this: are we kind of moving in that direction? There's this potential win-win convergence between Catholic social teaching, the mission of Catholic institutions, the needs of immigrants, and the gifts and contributions of immigrants. But is it taking place at kind of a pace and at a level that we want it to? I must say that, you know, I've been working on immigration-related issues for 22 years now, most of them in the Catholic world, and I never before, you know, this process had met with such diverse people that are coming at immigrant needs from so many perspectives. Over the last year, we've worked very, very hard to document the Church's impressive work with immigrants, and we've identified best practices, themes, and challenges that run throughout this work. And we now have a strong, I think, second draft of a long report, thanks to a lot of your comments, the comments of our advisory group, on the work of Catholic institutions, both past and present, with immigrants, which makes recommendations for expanding and improving this collective work and for lifting up, I think, important models. My hope is that the report will establish baseline knowledge on integration, the needs we're addressing, and the goals of this initiative, and will be a useful tool kind of to move ahead. But the fact is that the report is just that. It's just a starting point, just a starting point. And our larger goal is to make integration in the Catholic sense of this term a greater collective priority. So our agenda today reflects many of the themes that have surfaced over the last year. And let me just list a few by way of explaining the project. First, the Church supports the concept of integral development, which it defines as the development of each person in the whole person. And this, I think, is part of what distinguishes the way that we think about integration. That said, it's clear that we don't have all the institutional pieces in place to promote integral development. And today we plan to discuss some of the missing pieces. What ministries need to be revitalized, like the Catholic labor ministries, for example. How can we reorient existing institutions in response to the needs and contributions of newcomers? We have a very good example kind of in this room over the last 25 years. Catholic Charities, which are the greatest, largest social service, private or nonprofit social service network, has also become the nation's largest legal services network for immigrants. So there's a great example of the way that Catholic institutions can be reoriented, all in response to the needs of immigrants and the gifts of immigrants, because of course, who runs those programs? It's immigrants, mostly. Second, how do we ensure the full participation of immigrants and their children in our institutions, as leaders, as staff, as volunteers, as recipients of services? As Sister Raymonda Duval put it last year, we need to model hospitality and integration in our own institutions if we hope to be effective integrating institutions and realize our potential as integrating institutions. Third, what are some of the unique challenges that we face given the immense number of foreign-born persons without legal status? We're going to have Kevin Appleby speak to us just before lunch on the prospects for immigration reform, which of course we badly need, but we can't wait for reform. And the goal of immigrant integration, of course, is a much broader, larger goal than reform anyway. We need reform, but the ultimate goal is broader than legal status. Fourth, how can we integrate our services better, working together as Catholic agencies and working with public, private, and NGO partner agencies? Again, with that idea of integral development. And fifth, what are the effective models that need to be lifted up, replicated, and adapted? All of these points, I think, go to the question, how can we educate and inspire ourselves to do more and to do better with immigrants? Over the last year, I've learned quite a bit about the remarkable work that Catholic institutions are doing with immigrants, and I've actually, as I said, been in the field for 22 years, but it's been a total eye-opener for me. In hospitals, in schools, in the workplace, in universities, in charities and refugee programs, religious communities, organizing agencies, and on and on. And we're going to learn more about some of that work today. If it's possible, however, I've grown nostalgic over the last year for a church that I actually never experienced. And that was the church that at the outset of our nation had 30 priests, it had a few groups of sisters, it had one bishop, it had one university, and it had less than 1% of the population. And it was the church that 60 years later was the nation's largest denomination, and it had grown entirely through immigration. It was the church that established virtually all of its leading characteristic defining institutions in response to the needs and gifts of successive waves of immigrants, their children, and their grandchildren. And it was the church that was the intellectual force behind much of the New Deal legislation, and on and on. What was its driving vision? What was it trying to do? Well, it was trying to create a set of interlocking, cradle-to-grave institutions that would provide a level of security and material well-being to people in need. And of course, there were many people in need. It was trying to preserve the faith of its members in a society that viewed Catholicism with suspicion and with hostility. Just, I might add, as many now view our immigrant co-religionists. It was trying to educate and to provide Catholics with the tools to succeed in the larger society. It sought to instill in them a sense of belonging, community, and security in their religious and ethnic identity. And it was trying to position them to integrate into the larger society from a place of acceptance, strength, and dignity. It was trying to provide a common spiritual home to persons from diverse nations and persons from the same nation, actually, that had never viewed themselves as part of the same community before. It was seeking to create loyal Americans who were committed to building a better society, who wanted to build a human family, welcome the stranger, gather together God's scattered children, and to live the faith through acts of charity and justice. Does any of that sound familiar? It sounded very familiar to me when I was reading these histories. What it wasn't trying to do, and what it's never been trying to do, is to assimilate Catholics into the dominant culture or to shore up the status quo. It sought to evangelize and transform the culture, the workplace, the larger society, in light of Catholic values. So over this last year, we've been exploring a distinctly Catholic sense of integration. And to be honest with you, even though we've called this project the Catholic Immigrant Integration Project, I'm still not sure that integration is the right word for it, but we're trying to take that word back anyway. And our working definition embraces the standard metrics, the standard secular metrics of integration, socioeconomic attainment, a sense of belonging, interaction with the host society, political participation, and on. But it places those metrics within a larger vision of integral development and communion between people. And communion, of course, requires two things. It requires personal conversion, but it also requires institutional commitment. The U.S. and Mexican bishops put this beautifully in Strangers No Longer, their pastoral statement in 2002-2003. They said, faith in the presence of Christ in the migrant leads to a conversion of mind and heart, which leads to a renewed spirit of communion and the building of structures of solidarity to accompany the migrant. We need to be honest, we don't fully have communion now among Catholics. If you read some of the ugly attacks by Catholic entities against immigrants and against the bishop's pastoral statement and some of their policy positions on immigrants, you know that that's true. We need conversion, and we're trying to strengthen our structures of solidarity, our institutions. So I think that's the vision behind the project in a nutshell. Where is the project headed? The short answer is we have a growing advisory group. Started with the core group last year in a meeting around this time last year up at the Bishops' Conference. And we'll be meeting tomorrow in the morning with that group to discuss next steps. We'll be discussing how we can expand the project's reach and influence, what sectors, ministries, institutions, and individuals need to be added to make this work and to grow. How can we use the Catholic Integration Report to explain and strengthen, market the initiative? What are our institutional gaps, and what are our gaps in knowledge in crafting a more unified Catholic response in support of immigrants and immigrant integration? Should there be a research component? For example, I've found some of the research on the way that Catholic parishes operate versus the way that evangelical congregations operate very, very telling. It's really worthwhile reading that literature. Should there be, and then I think, the other point is we need to obviously replicate and adapt very good models which are represented in this room by a lot of people. At what point do we share and do we kind of interface with non-Catholic institutions, who we work with every day, of course, and the idea was, could we get our Catholic house in order? Could we start talking as Catholics? Could we develop a common definition of integration, a common sense of integration and vision as Catholics first, and then go out and talk to others? But you should know that there was a lot of interest among partner agencies, non-Catholic partner agencies in this event and what we're doing here today. So if you're not on the advisory group and you have any ideas on direction of the project, who should be invited, who's not in the room, that needs to be in the room, please share them with me or with Rachel or with Brianna today. We're really dependent on you for good ideas. We have some ideas ourselves, but we're dependent on you for kind of next steps in the direction and initiative in expanding the reach and influence of the project. Let me stop there, and before introducing our first panel, let me ask if there's any questions or comments that people have about the day or what we're trying to do today with the project. Anything? That's okay. I mean, we'll have a lot of time. The panels are relatively short, and we're going to try to leave time for discussion because although it's a little bit of a larger group than we had last year, it's really important to kind of get that cross-fertilization, I think. So, later today we'll be discussing, the idea is, later today we'll be discussing the work of different institutions. We're lifting up some cross-cutting programs, and some of the important, obviously the important faith-based organizing, community organizing that's going on around the country. However, we wanted to begin the day, since we're driven by religious values, with an extended reflection on the theological, pastoral, and spiritual vision that underlies the church's integration work. And we use that word immigration a little bit loosely, right? I mean, we know how diverse immigrant communities are out there. And so what we wanted to do was to lift up the different gifts, the different challenges, and the different needs of particular immigrant communities, and reflect on diverse cultural perspectives on immigration at the outset. So the spiritual vision from diverse perspectives, Catholic perspectives. And with that in mind, I can't think of three better people than our first panel. And they are, in order, Sister Anna Nguyen she's the Assistant Director, and if you could come up, for Asian Pacific Island Affairs at the USCCB. I'm not sure if is it a committee now or is it a secretariat? Please come on. Secretariat for Cultural Diversity. And she's has a terrifically interesting background and is going to talk to us about Asian Pacific Island approaches and pastoral work on integration. And then Father Aniedi Okure, who's an old friend who now directs the African Faith and Justice Network and was formerly a valued colleague at the Old Pastoral Care for Migrants and Refugees at the U.S. Catholic Conference. And he's going to talk about his work with African immigrants and their perspectives on that. And then Tim Matovina, who's one of the church's great experts on Hispanic ministry, and the author of a very influential and valuable book on that topic, which is called Latino Catholicism, Transformation in America's Largest Church. So we're delighted, I should say too, that Tim directs the Institute for Latino Studies at Notre Dame. So we've asked each of these panelists, and I think throughout the day that's going to be like this, to speak for maybe 12 minutes or so, and then to reserve the rest of the time for discussion with you all. And we're going to start with Sister Anna. We're not doing long introductions today, but we really do have terrific people. So, Sister Anna, if you could start, thank you.
For this part, I'd like to present two pictures. One is a picture of a picture of refugee, Vietnamese refugee. Could you go back to the first slide, please? The previous one. That's it. Okay, thank you. Speak about refugee resettlement, integration experience, and Catholic response. And I like to highlight the Catholic response because that has an impact on our resettlement and integration, using my own family as an example, the Vietnamese people as an example, and take that to the national level to what Cardinal Law did in 1975 and what it looks like today, and take you to another picture that presents my current position as the Assistant Director for Asian Pacific Island Affairs and the challenges that our people are facing today to share with you. And I'm so delighted that from the introduction, I already heard that many of these issues are going to be discussed, and possibly in the discussion we would together be able to come up with a solution to mitigate the situation. So in 1975, my family and I came as Vietnamese refugee, to a little city in York, Pennsylvania. And on a snowy day, that first week that we were resettled in our home, came on foot the late pastor of St. Rose of Lima, knocked on our door, invited us to join his parish, put the school-aged children in school. And today, almost 40 years later, we are still parishioners. A few miles from St. Rose of Lima was St. Joseph's Church, a Franciscan staff church. That church opened their doors to not only our family, but to all the Vietnamese in the entire Harrisburg Diocese. So monthly, the Vietnamese would gather there for our Vietnamese Mass and social afterward. Annually, we gathered for the Vietnamese New Year. And the first picture, please. And we outgrew that little church so much that St. Joseph had to move out to a larger area, built a whole new church, a whole new school to absorb us. And today, St. Joseph, that's the auditorium of St. Joseph's Church, where the Vietnamese Catholics still gather every year. On that stage, about an hour before that picture was taken, Mass was celebrated right there to thank our God for our safety and everything we have, especially we have one another. The children play a center, front and center, in terms of entertainment. Those children, there's one in the middle, 6 years old, the one to the right, 7, the one to the left, 8, all are fluent in English, sang and danced and entertained totally, perfectly in Vietnamese. 40 years, we are still there, engaging. Annually, the estimate of the people that gathered in that auditorium is between 700 and 800 Vietnamese people gathered there. So that takes us to if you can go back to the first slide. Yes. That takes us to the second point where it says National International Carthage, Missouri. Cardinal Law, back then, he was a bishop of, let me grab my notes. Cardinal Bernard Law, back then he was the bishop of the Diocese of Springfield, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He took in 166 vowed religious men, gave them land. They are the congregation of Mary Co-Redemptress. They in 1978, it took about, almost 3 years, they organized their first Marian Days event when 500 people from across the country showed up to thank our Lord through Our Lady. Today, could we have the pictures? Yes, today, the event is annual. Today is estimated 60,000 people. And these pictures, just to show you one conference, how many people showed up. This is one conference in one auditorium. And at that event of those 3 days leading up to the Feast of the Assumption in August, there are over 100 conferences. And you see Father there, and he began to invite people onto the stage to join him because the auditorium was overflowed. Filled with people. Next picture, we can just keep flashing. You see how not even standing room only because people kept coming in. Next picture. Next picture. These are the sisters who gathered there. These are the priests who gathered there for the procession. And this is the last day when people got ready to go on the procession of Our Lady before we celebrated the concluding Mass of the Assumption. So just so that you know a vision and a bold step our Cardinal Law had taken almost 40 years ago, 39 years ago, and what it looks like today. Next slide, please. So the Catholic response is very much at the foundation of our integration, and that continues within USCCB. I won't go into the detail, but a reorganization happened so that we could have a secretariat on cultural diversity, and under that there are 5 subcommittees. One for African American, the other for Asian Pacific, Island Affairs, that's where I belong. Another one for Native Americans, another one for Hispanic Latino. Did I miss one? And so each one of the subcommittees then continue to respond to the pastoral needs of our people. Slide. So in this current position, I'm new in this position. I'm only 2 years old. And these are the challenges, open challenges that we have come across lately. The first one is reorganization of our church, closing or merging of churches. Integration means we engage, we stay, we celebrate, we take on the life of the community. And when closure or merging happens, that kind of shakes the foundation a little bit. The conversation would go like this. Oh, where do you belong? I used to belong to Good Shepherd. I'm not sure what the name of it now because we just merged with 2 other churches. So the concept of identity then becomes a little bit shaken, and adjustment needs to be made to absorb new identity. Also, in the specific to maybe more groups, but I'll speak best to the Vietnamese people, is that we have personal parishes, probably mostly in the West, Orange County to be specific. There are pros and cons. Those who are for personal parishes observe that to be grounded in our own culture of origin provides us the foundation for us to be able to integrate a little bit easier. And with that identity, we would be able to serve all. But lacking that identity, we may struggle. For those who are for the shared parishes, a good example of that would be St. Joseph, where my family belong, is that, integration seems organic, and the parents do desire that integration for their children and grandchildren, provided that they would have a forum to return to continuously be grounded in their own culture of origin. There are gaps in identity because if you ask a younger people, second or subsequent generations, they may say, I'm more Vietnamese I'm more American than Vietnamese, or I'm more Korean than Vietnamese, or I'm more Chinese, I'm more American than Chinese, and so on and so forth, because that's how they see themselves. And that kind of frightened the first generation a little bit, because the first generation would say to them, never forget who you are. Never forget that you're Vietnamese. Never forget that you're Korean or Japanese, and so on and so forth. So the gaps, then the communication, the identity would be a little bit, people would struggle a little bit. Geography. If you look at U.S. Census of 2010, you will see that Asian Pacific people spread across the country. And smaller groups, like our friend here, the Cambodians, Laotian, Thai, or smaller groups would get lost because they would not have the means to get together or come together the way larger groups like the Vietnamese or Korean or Chinese would be able to come together and be grounded in their culture of origin. So that kind of deter or challenge integration a little bit. Cultural sensitivity most recently is keenly felt toward the people who just came from the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, or Afghanistan, is tangibly felt. And there are programs or programming that try to mitigate that. And for our priests or leaders who come from foreign land, we have orientation program or mentorship program, or within USCCB itself, we have a program that's called Building Intercultural Competency for Ministers to help us go out and be able to serve all with an increased sense of cultural sensitivity. Access to services or lack of it also a deterrent to integration. And some of the areas that we came across would be people, I think it was touched on, and it probably will be touched on some more, that our people work for very little compensation, mostly under the table, taking 2-3 jobs with no insurance or health care, insurance for health care, Social Security, disability, all of the benefits that we normally would have. Our new immigrants may not have any, or if they do, they have very little. Catholic schools, you know, my own sisters and brother-in-law work from 2 to 3 to 4 jobs, actually, to put my nephews and nieces through school. I'm not sure if that is possible today. Even if they took 3-4 jobs, the cost of Catholic school is so high that it may not even be possible. If you came with a family of with 4 or 5 children in your family, all school age, it may be very difficult to provide Catholic education for our children today. Healthcare, probably we'll touch on later. Welfare, undocumented. Asian Pacific people, I don't know how many, because a lot of them are still living in hiding, but they are there, living in hiding, undocumented, specific. I think it is aware, the things have been done already are the Filipinos, due to the Typhoon Yolanda, not able to return to their home country. I think steps have been taken to advocate for extended protection for them here. Vietnamese, Chinese, Koreans, many of our people are still living in hiding because of undocumentation or lack of documentation. Lastly is the mental health, lack of services, or you probably see some literature written about people from Bhutan that they're susceptible to PTSD and suicide. It's true of Vietnamese too, but it's not well written because it's not well reported. Stigma has a lot to do with it. And if they get through all of those steps and be able to have a mental health diagnosis, then they can go into care and be able to live successfully. But if they don't, then the family try to manage somehow, some way. And if they jump through all the hoops and be able to get into care many times because of relapses, they then become system dependent. And so they can work so hard to get themselves out of the cycle of poverty, they can fall right back into it and keep going within one cycle of poverty to the next. And I'm sure that can be observed with other populations as well, but just so that you can share the awareness that that is also true of Asian Pacific community. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, I'm going to kind of just take out a few points, some key points about African immigrants, with a focus on African Catholic immigrants here. So I start by saying, who are they? African immigrants here are mostly from, quote, at least mentally middle class group. That is to say, the well-educated, most college graduates, according to US Census, but many of them majority of them are working in jobs they are overqualified for. Sometimes you see somebody with an MBA is driving the cab in the city. So that's the situation there. But there are also many who have succeeded in getting jobs that are commensurate with their qualifications and are happy about it. But nonetheless, each and everyone is struggling to make a good living in society. Secondly, most African immigrants in this country live in two worlds. That is, they have part of their feet, or one foot grounded here in the American society, another grounded in the home country. And by doing that, they try to maintain two homes, as it were, living between the space. One home here, another home in the home country, and that translates into a continuous support of other family members and extended family members in the home country. What that does is that it increases financial demands on most African-borns who are here. Some are overstressed, working 2-3 jobs to keep up. Unfortunately, that also comes with a price, an increase in family tensions here, such that is not found in the home country. I'll get into that further later. So the family tensions are due to several factors, but especially one, financial demands, two, the lack of extended family support that they would have normally enjoyed in the home country, and a third is the clash of cultures, where cultural expectations within the home, understood in this case husband and wife, and outflow of that children are not exactly the same. So that clash of cultures generate tensions. And I want to keep that word tension in mind because it's very crucial. And so the third way in this section is you have children of the immigrants who also live in two worlds. And the challenge they bring not only, I know this is not only unique to the African family, but nonetheless is a major issue for the African families. A second major area is that we see many Africans here develop what I may call a generous ecumenical spirit. Very liberal ecumenical spirit, going to several churches, denominations. And they are drawn to it mostly because, quote, they feel a sense of belonging there. And some of these denominations are either headed by African-born pastors or African-American churches where they cross, Catholic or not, it doesn't matter. So we have that happening. But we also have those who are very staunch, very strong, and nothing is going to take them out of the Catholic Church to go elsewhere. So what are some of the challenges that the African immigrants face in this country? The first is the question of visibility and recognition. I remember when we were the Secretariat for Cultural Diversity from the USCCB had asked us to do a study of African and Caribbean Catholics in the US about maybe 6 years ago. Yeah. And we started conducting survey in dioceses. So we sent out a questionnaire to dioceses, and in one diocese, which I happen to know very well, namely know the African immigrants there, including 2 of my cousins, who collectively, 26 of them, go to the Cathedral Parish. The questionnaire came back from the diocese because we asked how many people do you know that Africans, how many are Caribbeans? The form was returned to me and said, there are none. I said, what? I know, in fact, I know 26 people who go to the Cathedral Parish, including 2 of them were serving as Eucharistic ministers. So the problem of visibility and recognition, and I will, we'll take that up at the discussion. A second set of challenges lie in the area of identity. Once it's summed up in this. One African priest once said, I didn't know I was black until I came to the United States. So that captures what I'm trying to say here. It is important, because prior to coming here, there were Tanzanians, Kenyans, Cameroonians, Congolese, Nigerians, etc. And suddenly, they find themselves in a category that they are trying to struggle with. In some ways, that their previous identity is more or less declared null and void. And so in an attempt to maintain that, which I want to talk a little more about this, that it becomes very delicate because it is often very much misunderstood, by dioceses, by people who work with African immigrants, so that this delicate issue, as I said, with newcomers, sometimes is seen as, they don't want to be with African American group. I've heard that over and over. There is something deeper, and this is often misunderstood because the issue of identity for anybody runs very deep. And when that is challenged, when there is a move to annul that identity, people fight to maintain it in all sorts of ways. And so caution to dioceses that people come and they don't reach out to them and say, we have office for black Catholics. Forgetting that the newcomers are immigrants. And that carries with it a lot of challenges. That terminology, the fact that one is immigrant, raise a lot of very different circumstances from the native born, from immigration, from trying to adjust to culture, from trying to, to find a way of belonging. So that issue needs to be treated carefully and not misunderstood and translated into something else. So some dioceses do recognize this element, and so when they address it, things work out very well. And research has shown that people adapt better to new contexts. System in touch on that. People adapt better to new contexts when they voluntarily embrace their new culture, and when that is done on their own terms, while they maintain, as it were, their cultural heritage while adapting to the new. And it becomes even more crucial for the second generation because by doing so, they become bicultural or culturally competent. Studies have shown that children who embrace their parents' cultural context adjust better to the new culture. That's a fact. Under that also is integration and acceptance in what it means to be a member of the church. Many Africans come here because in Africa, you go to church, you are a member of that church. You don't need to register. And it has happened so many times that people have gone to the same church for 3-4 years and they approach the pastor and say, we are getting married. And the pastor said, where do you belong? Which church? I said, I'm here. But you are not registered, and it becomes an issue. So an outreach program is needed here. And in case of the tensions, I would like maybe in the discussion period, there is a strong need for marriage counseling. A strong need for marriage counseling for African families. And I want to repeat that over and over. And maybe during the discussion, Sister Joanna can contribute to that. There is a strong need for that because the tensions I described in terms of by location, you know, and cultural challenges has generated such enormous tension within families here, you know, especially when compared to when you take up a comparative family back in their home country. And so, so the next thing is about a Catholic response. I'm looking at my time here. Is that I want to quickly share some models that we find working. How can the church reach out? There is need for an outreach program. It was very heartwarming hearing sisters say, Pastor came knocking at the church, at their door, and inviting them. And a recognition by the bishop of the community. That is very important. Right now, there is, let me present 3 different models of inclusion. I cite for one St. Mary's Church in Randolph in the Archdiocese of Boston, a parish that I happen to know. The pastor is terrific. It's a church with a large group of Africans and a large group of Haitians. They don't have a separate bus for them, but the pastor has done a formidable job in making both those immigrant groups belong to the church. How does he do it? He ensures that he invites families for the lectors and Eucharistic ministers. He makes sure that every child that has reached the age to be acolyte from the immigrant family is invited to be a part of it. And so the pastoral staff has been very proactive in getting the parents to participate in teaching CCD. So they are part and parcel of the larger church, and they don't feel the need to have a separate service for them. That's one model. The second model is where you have communities that are national specific, you know, where you have like the Cameroonians or the Eritrean Geese community, where they build a strong network, they get appointed a chaplain, they get a recognition by the diocese, and they are allowed to function as a church, you know, by themselves with pastoral councils and everything else. And they are functioning well. A third group are some groups that are ethnic specific and are large numbers, very strong locally, but with a network nationally. An example is the Igbo Catholic community, you know, here in the US that is, you know, has like satellites across the country. But in all of this, what makes them really thick, what makes them function well, is that there is a formal recognition, there is a place of connection between them and the parish, there is a focus on youth and young adults, and then youth and young adults are connected to similar activities. And they have tried to select leaders for this group. When I mean, they mean the parishes, the pastors, the parishes and dioceses, to select leaders who actually represent the people. You know, sometimes we might say, okay, Aniedi is African, let's take Aniedi and put here. But, you know, you go to Africa and they say, oh, Aniedi is your representative, and says, Aniedi who? You know. So make sure that the people you represent, you choose to represent, actually represent the people. I'll stop there and get the rest for discussion. Thank you.
I'm asked to speak a bit about the theology behind integration, as well as maybe some examples from Latino. So I hope what I'm going to say will not overlap too much with Bishop DiMarzio or other speakers, and if it does, we're going to blame the Holy Spirit. So I want to start with the earliest instance of integration in the church, which is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, which says this. In those days, as the number of disciples grew, the ones who spoke Greek complained that their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food, as compared with the widows of those who spoke Hebrew. The 12 assembled the community of the disciples and said, "It is not right for us to neglect the word of God in order to wait on tables. Look around among your own number for 7 leaders acknowledged to be deeply spiritual and prudent, and we shall appoint them to this task. This will permit us to concentrate on prayer and the ministry of the word." The proposal was unanimously accepted by the community. Following this, they selected Stephen, a man filled with faith and the Holy Spirit, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas of Antioch, who had been a convert to Judaism. They presented these men to the apostles, who first prayed over them and then imposed hands on them. The word of God continued to spread, while at the same time the number of the disciples in Jerusalem enormously increased. The word of the Lord. The word of the Lord. God help us to live and put it in practice. I think there's some beautiful points about theology of integration here, and I'm preaching to the choir, I know, so I'm just sort of saying things that I know we know, just trying to highlight them as we begin our reflections together today. And the first one, of course, is that this desire and the source of communion is our common faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, we're going to talk about sociological dynamics. We already have. I'm going to do the same. We're going to talk about, how groups come together, what the processes are, all very important. But the first point, which the apostles give us the example of, is this is always rooted in Christ. That is the source of our unity, not some other way that we can bring ourselves together, which is a vehicle to, achieving the unity that's already given to us in Christ. This is always a gift of God and a challenge. It's a gift we've been given and a challenge that we have not yet lived. Secondly, I can't help but notice, I'm sure you do too, the communal discernment in this text. That the community gets together and there's a problem. The Greeks and the Hebrews are not being treated equally. Somebody's going to have to do something. There's a human dynamic here. And the community decides. The apostles propose a solution. And the community unanimously assents to it. And so they search together for this, which is exactly what this entire project in our day-to-day is all about. But thirdly, and perhaps this is maybe the thing we miss most often in this text, the pastoral wisdom of the apostles. It's the Greek widows who are being mistreated. And if you notice those 7 names of the first deacons, they are all Greek. Of course, the apostles were all Hebrews. So we have a community which is led by one group, and there's another group that's feeling that they're not quite being treated equally or properly. And the solution, the tremendous pastoral wisdom of Peter and the original 12 is, we can't take care of this. We need to get leaders from their group. Father was just mentioning this a moment ago, how this works in the African community. And so they have this tremendous pastoral insight that has been sitting there from the first days of the church from the very beginning. We need leadership, parity leadership from all the groups. Those are just a few points about a basic theology that comes out of the Acts of the Apostles. I think they underscore a lot of what we're going to say all day today. Let me move to another point. The function of national parishes. That was Father's second model. Actually, it was Silvano Tomasi, now a cardinal, but a leader of this organization previously, who wrote the first important book on American Catholic history about the role of national parishes. He studied Italian national parishes, appropriate where we're standing today in the 100th anniversary of this parish. And what he basically said is these parishes allowed immigrants, and especially their children and grandchildren, to integrate from a position of strength. A great irony. Catholic immigrants founded parishes because they wanted to preserve the language and culture of their homeland. And in fact, those institutions became the greatest American institutions for integrating immigrants. because it allowed them to do them in their own way, in their own time, and of their own choice. Of course, the women religious are a huge, huge part of this story. We're all standing on their shoulders because they founded the Catholic schools, the first bilingual schools in this country, because it was Italian nuns teaching Italian children, or German nuns or Polish nuns, and so on. And over a generation or two, they prepared, while the immigrants wanted to preserve that faith and culture intermittently, the children and the grandchildren learned the language and ways of this country from the most trusted source, the parish, the priest, the sisters, the Catholic leaders. And so these parishes allowed this tremendous integration process to happen. Nowadays, we don't have so many national parishes. We do have a number of them. Asian, African, even Latinos, if they're not canonically national parishes, de facto many of them are, if 99% of the parishioners are of one particular ethnic group. But the biggest sea change in parish life in the United States is that 100 years ago, 2/3 of our parishes were national parishes. Today, 1/3 of our parishes regularly have Mass in 2 or more language groups. So we're going to be going nothing less than a sea change in the parish experience, not just for the immigrants, for all Catholics, from what used to be a church of largely national parishes to what is now a church with and it grows every year, the number of parishes that serve 2 or more groups. There is where the integration problem is, or situation is different than yesteryear. Because it's not usually, although sometimes, as Father said, sometimes it's through the national parish, but more and more it's through the mixed parish, the shared parish, and so on. What we see very often in these parishes is that people from the new groups desire to carve out a space for themselves in the same way previous immigrants did in national parishes. Be it through a Mass in their own language, their own chaplain or their own priest, their own religious images in the sanctuary, their own celebrations and feast days, and so on. And so the challenge is, how do we allow people space to come into integration in their own time and still have those expressions of unity? Maybe a multilingual, bilingual Mass on Holy Thursday, or other expressions that begin to show our unity in Christ, even while people have the freedom to come along in their own way. It's not fair to expect today's immigrants to integrate in 1 week or 1 year when we didn't do it this way in the past. And that's very often the expectation. I'll move to my final points now. I'm basically going to repeat the same points from the Acts of the Apostles. How do they apply today? First of all, if we're going to seek integration theologically and pastorally, it always has to be rooted in Christ, in the communion of the church. This is a very simple point. It's an obvious point. But it's one we forget again and again and again. Maybe not people in this room, but some of the people that you deal with in your ministries, who act as if the purpose of the parish is to teach people English. Or the purpose of the parish is to create a unity based on one language, which is the dominant language, and one culture, which means deculturating all the newcomers. Now, it's not the case that we shouldn't teach people English. That's not the point. Of course, people need to learn English, and they do in this country. It's almost inevitable. But the purpose of the parish is not to teach people English or assimilate them in a rapid and almost a very kind of imposing way. The purpose of the parish is to carry on the mission of Jesus Christ, to evangelize, to be the church. And for many people, that means praying and worshiping, of course, in the language that most feeds their faith life, particularly immigrants who are undergoing all sorts of discombobulation of other sorts in their lives. So we've got to come back to that memory that the purpose of the parish is to evangelize. And our unity in Christ is based on Christ, not on one language, not on one culture, but on one faith, our faith in Jesus Christ. A very simple point. But of course, we need to keep saying it to ourselves, and especially some of our fellow Catholics again and again and again. Secondly, we learn a lot from the integration processes of national parishes in the past. And we've got to keep remembering those lessons. Here, I want to say something. I want to say this very, very clearly, because it maybe could be easily understood. Hospitality is not enough. Cultural sensitivity is not enough. I'm not speaking against those. We've just had beautiful examples of those. But think about those words. Cultural sensitivity kind of presumes that one group is in power, my group, the Irish group, and they will more or less stay in power. And then the others will be tolerated in their difference to the extent that the in-group decides. And the group that was there and founded the parish usually has it. Hospitality is the same way. Sure, we should offer hospitality, absolutely, to our fellow Catholics, but it shouldn't stop there. The church is not holy because all are welcome. The church is holy because everyone belongs. We already heard that word a few times. So it's not just welcoming. So even when you say that, welcome to our parish. Welcome to our parish. That means it's our parish, and you're a guest. But baptized Catholics, and actually all people, they're not guests. They're members of the household. They belong already by virtue of baptism, whether they have registered or not. They are full members of the household. So we need to find ways, and I think that's where we are with the integration process in our Catholic Church and actually in our society. I think there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of desire to welcome and a lot of hospitality. But we got to take the next step from hospitality to homecoming, to helping people to truly feel at home. To do that, we have to have leadership parity. We have to have people allowed to have their own celebrations, their own space, and all the other things that says to them, not just I'm a guest in someone else's house, but I am a member of the house of Jesus Christ, where all are equally welcome. We'll all come together. To do this, finally, we have to be aware of power relations. That can sound like a very negative thing to say in church. We're about servant leadership. But let's face it, those of us who don't usually want to talk about power relations in our universities, like Notre Dame, in our parishes, in our hospitals, in whatever agency we're in, are usually the ones who are already in power. We're the ones who want to say, well, let's do it the way Jesus would do it. Well, the way Jesus did it and the way the apostles did it is they said, the Greeks are having trouble, we got to give the Greeks some leaders of their own. We got to share our leadership, authority, by power I mean decision-making processes, with everyone. And when we do that, we're going to have a greater church. African-American sisters and brothers often remind us that that black magi that arrived at the stable of Bethlehem didn't go in through the back door. He walked right through the front with the rest of them and put his gift down at the manger. So we really got to pay attention to power relations. Even though we put Christ first, we've got to pay attention to those human dynamics, particularly those, very often the immigrants, who vote with their feet because no one has listened to them and allow them to have a real stake in the institution. I want to end with I ended with an inspirational story. I want to end with one. One of my proudest moments as a Catholic. I wrote a book years ago on the cathedral in San Antonio, Texas, San Fernando Cathedral, a place where my wife and I were married, my favorite church. I love many others, but that's a very big one for me. And I was working with the pastor, my good friend, Father Virgil Elizondo at the time, to study this, the oldest cathedral sanctuary in the United States of any religion. So my job was to interview people because it had been an inner city church that was kind of going down. When Father Virgil got there, it just came alive. And I was interviewing all these people and asking them, why do you come to this church? What is so exciting about this church? And it was an inner city, largely Latino, but very kind of intercultural church, and everybody came there. And one of the people I interviewed was the mayor of San Antonio, whose office was across the plaza. It's an old Mexican Catholic town, so everything's right in the central plaza. And he was a Baptist. But he'd show up 2 or 3 times a week for the noon mass, which is very convenient. So that's one day I said, Mayor, may I interview you and ask you? He says, about what? I said, about San Fernando Cathedral. He says, oh, yeah. He says, you call my secretary, I'll see you. So I went and saw him, and we got talking. I said, well, Mayor, I noticed you're not even Catholic, but there you are. Well, what is it that attracts you to worship, to be in that community? He said, well, the preaching. Those preachers. He says, I'm a Baptist, and I appreciate preaching. Those priests over there, they know how to preach. They got the word. And he's kept going. He says, I love the old church. It's this old sanctuary. He says, the black marks from the candles on the walls and those old, it just, kind of gives me a feeling of holiness. All the generations that have, and I kept pressing him on all this. I said, well, tell me some more. He says, I've never said this to anyone else. He says, actually, I never thought about it too much myself, but now that you're saying it, here's something I really like about San Fernando. He says, I'm the mayor. And I go into that church, and you walk in there, and those old Mexican ladies are handing out the worship aids and all that, and it doesn't matter who you are. I don't think most of those women even know I'm the mayor. But they're always welcoming in. And when I go in, there might be a homeless person coming behind me, or the head of the Frost Bank, or the head of the Chamber of Commerce, or one of the prostitutes that works in the... Everybody's coming in to go to that Mass. Some of them are getting out of the rain, some of them are tourists, but everybody's going in, because Mass was always, had a good crowd for a weekday Mass. And so when I walk in that church, I don't know who I'm going to sit next to, the head of the Chamber of Commerce or this other person. But we're all treated exactly the same. He says, I've noticed this. I can tell you, some of the people that went to the San Fernando Cathedral, if they'd show up at my Baptist church, which was on the north side, rich side of town, on Sunday, the ushers would come up and say, oh, welcome, can we help you? In such a way that they were new, they weren't supposed to be there. But San Fernando, everybody comes in. He says, we're all the same. He says, and that's what I love about that church. It's the only place in the city, of which I have the honor to be the mayor, in which we all meet as equals. We are all fellow San Antonians. When you walk through the front doors of that cathedral, you know you went into a different place. It's not the rest of the city. If I go around the city, I'm always treated well. You know, if I go to the Chamber of Commerce, maybe my political enemies, but they're nice to me because they want to get something from me. It's Mr. Mayor this and Mr. Mayor that. When I walk into San Fernando, I'm another San Antonio. He says, I got to tell you something. Sometimes I come back to my office after Mass and after my lunch, and he had a cross and a Bible there. As I kneel before the cross, and I say, Lord, thank you for allowing me the grace to be the mayor of your city, San Antonio. Help me this afternoon to do my work in such a way that I make your city a little bit more like San Fernando Cathedral. You know, that sense that this is a place that is truly holy. Because when someone walks through the door here, they know that they're a member of the household. Whoever they are, they belong. God help us to integrate one another in such a way.
Wow, talk about a powerful start, huh? Questions, comments, please? You heard the themes, you know, invitation, sense of belonging. Integration works best when it's rooted in people have a strong sense of their own culture and identity. That's honored. The kind of need for real leadership, not imposed leadership. Communion rooted in faith. Yes, sister. And if you could identify yourself too.
Good morning. Thank you again for that, the wonderful presentation, all three of you. I want to begin my question from the last presenter. Did I call my name? Sister
No.
Joanne Okure. I work at the Bishops' Conference. I work under the Secretariat of Cultural Diversity, and I coordinate activities of the Pastoral Care for Migrants, Refugees, and Travelers. In all my travels to many places, to make sure I reach out to the immigrants, I have met a lot of people who ask me, oh, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Nigeria. The next person, when are you going back? Then I turn back to relate to that question. How is that a sense of belonging? How is that a welcoming attitude? My question to you, how do we, all of us as a church in America, make an immigrant person more welcome, feeling that sense of belonging? Here is my church, so as to worship in order to bring out our gifts. Thank you.
Well, sister, that's a question that we could spend a long time answering, so I'll give a short answer so others might want to speak. First of all, I think one very important point to remember that I didn't have time to say. Everything we do in the church, evangelization, catechesis, social justice, we always, how are you doing? How are you doing in your parish? we're doing okay, but we could do better. This issue of unity and diversity is something we often see as a problem that should be fixed now. And of course, it's never fixed now. It's like everything else in the church, it's something already given in Christ and something we have to keep striving to attain better and better. So we should see ourselves as on a journey and not seeking a solution to a problem, but on a journey of growing deeper in our unity in Christ. Practically speaking, I think the things were already said actually very well by others here. We need leadership parity. I think that's first. We need the symbols, the celebrations that say home. And then we just need to be Catholics. I think that's what you were saying. These people say, sister, when are you going home? We need to say, instead of, who is this person? Where are they from? We need to say, this is a person who has the same faith in Jesus Christ that I do. We are sisters and brothers already. And so we just need to be stronger Catholics. And of course, that's a part of the conversion of the heart and soul of each one of us.
Other comments, questions? Yes.
Hi, good morning. Richard Wood from Archdiocese of Santa Fe and the University of New Mexico, and an advisor to this organization and to CCHD. I want to go back to something you said, Don, at the opening framing about 100 years ago, the building of institutions that really were served to integrate immigrants into this country. And my question is, how do we go about that now in the 21st century in a way that doesn't just create ghettos of immigrants, but really integrates folks in, with all the ambiguity of the word integration that you talked about? Tim Matovina's closing story speaks to that to me, because it's such a great story about what the phrase you used on of the evangelization of institutions and culture in this country. which is really what the Cathedral in San Antonio was doing. So maybe part of the answer about creating institutions that don't create ghettos is they need to be institutions that both evangelize this country's society and culture. The second part of it, to me, maybe is about challenging immigrant communities in new ways to come to terms with America. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that. How do we go about it?
Any of you all? I mean, we're very clearly going to be talking about kind of models of ways to do that and featuring some of those models, I think, later today. But yes, sister.
Probably a change in mindset. Instead of thinking about personal or national parishes or ethnic groups or organizations as ghettos, so to speak, perhaps we can think about them as foundational. They need to have that first before they could organically integrate into the mainstream society and be of better service to all of us here in the country.
I think in terms of your second part, how do we challenge immigrants into be part of the church? That is also crucial. It's how we approach them, you know. Something that comes across, I talked about Africans, but it happens to others too, is this question of perpetually feeling as guests, even after being here for years, becoming citizens, voting at presidential elections, and you still get a question like Sister Joanna was saying, where are you from? Where are you going back? Where are you going back? So there is that feeling of, oh, I don't really belong. However, when there is an outreach from the host to invite, and a question of invitation is very crucial. You know, many cultures, Africans especially, I know some Asian cultures, it could be that you bring people to a gathering to make contribution to a speech. If you don't specifically say, okay, it's your turn to speak, what do you have to say? You know, somebody might just sit there and not, you know, in this culture we are eager to make a mark, you know. Other cultures are not like that. They want to be invited, acknowledge the gifts you bring, so that you can stand sit around the table and talk. And added to that is that in that question of invitation, sometimes, you know, you give, even if you don't know they can do something, say, do it. And that becomes a challenge. Then you can see people rallying around to make sure it happens. So that is an aspect to do too.
Yes. Why don't we take like 3 more questions and then we'll answer them all together. Or comments? Yes, please.
Actually, this is a comment.
Okay. Yep.
Is it on?
Yes.
I'm a third-generation American. My grandparents on my mother's side came from Italy, and my grandparents on my father's side came from northern Spain. And I'm just going to tell this story because I think it's emblematic of what we're talking about here. And everybody was in the melting pot of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The first time I went to Italy, when I was in my mid-20s, I got there, because I had grown up in immigrant households, I always thought of these 2 nationalities as immigrant nationalities. And the first time I went to Italy, traveling, I got there and I said, my gosh, these people run a country. Not well, but they run a country. And suddenly, Italians weren't immigrants anymore. They were people running their country. And it gave me an entirely different insight. Because my mother, who was born in this country, but her parents weren't, always used to talk about Americans. Well, they're Americans, you know, and they're different somehow. So for me, it was eye-opening to go. And all of us, as we think about our travels, when we travel, we go to the host country and we say, oh, this culture is wonderful, this is amazing. I mean, I can't think of anywhere I've been in the world that I haven't been fascinated by the culture. Bring those people to America, and suddenly that culture is suspect in some way. It's not as fascinating, it's not as rich, it's not as engaging as it is when you're there. So it's just something to think about. You know, it's an American attitude that I guess develops when you become more assimilated into the culture. But I just offer that as a...
Thank you. Yeah, Father Cleet.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about the ambivalence that one encounters sometimes within immigrants themselves about integrating. For example, I was a pastor in a large parish in Chicago, mostly of Mexican immigrants. And that was an issue we found at times, that many of our folks had a view to returning home after they retired. They were building houses, they wanted to go back. Many of our other immigrants that we've been talking about maybe this morning, the rupture from their home country is much more definitive. And could you talk about that dynamic, how that plays out maybe in integration?
Well, I can say something, others can add about the Africans. I know, yes, it's true. When I spoke about living in two worlds, and hoping. But the fact of the matter is that hardly happens. Some come here and said, "Oh, I will return home," and they say it's 10, 20. They are married, the children are born here. And things keep growing. So that sometimes can be a challenge to the immigrant community itself, in terms of fully belonging, fully invested in here. So what happens is that over the years, the social network at home continues to diminish by virtue of being far away here. So the social capital there is diminishing. And some of them don't make a real effort to cultivate the same capital here, where they live, they work, they pay tax to Uncle Sam, and all of that. So, yeah, and I think this is also an area that we can do some counseling. Said, okay, you've been here 20 years, your children are here, the likelihood of retiring home diminishes over the years, because the investment is here, socially, culturally, economically, and family. I don't know if that touches that.
Just real quickly to reinforce, and this is more from the Latino perspective, the National Study of Latinos a few years ago showed that first generation, almost 50%, they asked them, did you contact someone in your home country in the last month? Almost 50%. Third generation, less than 3%. So it certainly changes over time. I think, Father, I'm sure, from what you said, I'm sure you've seen this. The first generation who's got this ambiguous relationship with home, I'm going, I'm not going, it often causes even greater problems in their communication with their children and their grandchildren, who are much more rooted here and are the group that's cementing in. So actually that can cause that psychological tension where the children look at the parents and say, well, they're not part of my world, they're not part of my reality, and as you know, it happens in Latino families sometimes. That's a real pastoral challenge of dealing with that. So it's just a reality. People's longing for home obviously stays, especially with the generation that was formed there.
We just do one more quick question here, Todd. Yeah.
Sure. Hello, Todd Scribner from Migration and Refugee Services at the Bishops' Conference. It seems to me that one of the big problems confronting the American Catholic Church is that a lot of American Catholics are kind of overly integrated into American society. As a consequence, they've lost much of their Catholic identity. And I think that this is at the root of this is this notion of the emergence of the new evangelization and the importance of sort of re-evangelizing Catholics that are really need that strength, their Catholicity strengthened. And so my question is, what is the connection, I guess, between integration, the new evangelization on the one hand, and the important role that it plays and what that means theologically, and sociologically, et cetera, et cetera. And secondly, given that a lot of immigrants come to the United States with a much stronger Catholic identity oftentimes, I think, from regions that are still very, very Catholic, what role do immigrants play in the evangelization of Americans, particularly in light of these kind of dynamics in our life?
I'm sorry, this is a great question. I want to go quick, maybe you want to say something too, but you know, one of the biggest changes in American religion in the last 50 years, lots of sociological studies say, is we've gone from having a denominational affiliation, Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, to, as a Catholic, I'm not pointing to myself, I am, but actually I'm not trying to. Catholics and other groups tend to have more affiliation with other people from other denominations who think like I do in terms of conservative, progressive on this scale. So I feel more united to someone who has my social justice values than to, and this is across denominations, but it's a real problem for Catholics. And I think Pope Francis and, you know, recent popes, going to what you're saying, we need to say, no, it's not about that. We shouldn't be dividing ourselves out by this scale of values on liberal, conservative, whatever those words mean. But we share a common Catholic faith, and we need to build on that value. But I think it's a real challenge in our church because we're very divided, and we don't always put our Catholic identity as the first thing that unites us. And that's the process of conversion that I think your question is actually pointing to. I think you're right on.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank, anything else? No? Well, thank the panelists. They were terrific. Thank you very much.